Black Grandma nursed lost troops in a storm. That's when they vowed to honor her forever. The rain hit the windshield like bullets, each drop exploding against the glass with such force that Staff Sergeant Marcus Chen could barely see 3 feet ahead. Lightning tore across the sky, illuminating the narrow Alabama backroad for half a second before plunging everything back into darkness so complete it felt like being swallowed whole. "Sir, I think we're lost." Private Tommy Vasquez's voice cracked from the backseat, though whether from fear or the cold, Marcus couldn't tell. The heater had died 20 miles back, and now the Humvee's engine was making a sound like a dying animal. "We're not lost," Marcus snapped, though he knew it was a lie. They'd missed their turnoff 40 minutes ago, and his GPS had been nothing but static since they'd left Fort Benning. "We just need to find somewhere to wait out this storm." In the passenger seat, Specialist Jake Morrison laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. "Lost in the middle of nowhere, Alabama. My mom warned me about places like this." "What's that supposed to mean?" Corporal David Peterson spoke up from the back, his southern accent thick with defensiveness. "Nothing, man, just you know." "No, I don't know. Why don't you explain it to me?" Marcus gripped the steering wheel tighter. This was exactly what he didn't need right now. 3 days into their emergency cross-country deployment, and the tension in this vehicle was already thick enough to cut with a knife. 5 soldiers from completely different backgrounds, thrown together by bureaucratic chance, trying to get from Fort Benning to Fort Polk before the rest of their units shipped out. They were supposed to have made it in 18 hours. It had been 36, and they were nowhere. "Both of you shut it," Marcus said, his voice carrying the weight of his 3 combat deployments. "I don't care about your—" The engine made a sound like a gun going off, then died completely. The Humvee coasted for another 50 feet before coming to rest at an angle, half on the road, half in a ditch filled with muddy water. "You have got to be kidding me," Private Sarah Chen, no relation to Marcus, despite sharing a last name, said from the back. She'd been quiet until now, but her voice carried an edge of panic. "We're stuck out here." Marcus tried the ignition. Nothing, not even a click. "Everyone out," he ordered. "We need to push it off the road before someone—" Another flash of lightning, and in that brief moment of illumination, Marcus saw something that made his heart lift despite everything. About 100 yards ahead, through the sheets of rain, there was a light, a porch light, yellow and steady, attached to what looked like a small house set back from the road. "There," he said, pointing. "There's a house. We'll ask to use their phone, call for assistance." "You sure that's a good idea, Sarge?" Jake asked quietly. "I mean out here in the middle of the night. You got a better plan, Morrison? We can't stay in a dead Humvee on a back road in a lightning storm." The 5 of them climbed out into the deluge. Within seconds, Marcus was soaked through, his uniform plastered to his skin, water running down his neck in icy rivulets. They left the Humvee where it was no point trying to move it now, and made their way toward the light. As they got closer, Marcus could make out more details. It was a small house, probably built in the 50s or 60s, with white siding that looked like it had been recently painted. The porch was neat, with 2 rocking chairs and several potted plants. A wind chime hung silent in the storm, and there was a wreath on the door made of silk flowers and ribbon. Everything about it looked peaceful, welcoming even. But Marcus felt his stomach tighten anyway. Jake wasn't wrong to be nervous. 5 soldiers in uniform showing up at someone's door in the middle of the night in a storm in rural Alabama. That was the kind of thing that got people killed on both sides. "Everyone stay cool," Marcus said, though he wasn't sure if he was talking to his team or himself. "Let me do the talking. Morrison, Peterson, you stay at the back. Sarah, Tommy, flank position but not aggressive. We don't want to look like a threat." He climbed the 3 wooden steps to the porch, water pouring off him, and knocked on the door. 3 times, firm but not aggressive, official. Nothing happened for a long moment. Then he heard movement inside, slow, careful footsteps. The porch light flickered, and Marcus realized it wasn't electric. It was an old kerosene lantern, the kind his grandmother used to have at her cabin. The door opened 6 inches, held by a chain lock. In the gap, Marcus saw a face that made him catch his breath. An elderly black woman, probably in her late 70s or early 80s, with steel-gray hair pulled back in a neat bun. She wore glasses with thick frames, and her eyes, sharp and intelligent, scanned all 5 of them in the span of about 2 seconds. "Ma'am," Marcus started, "I'm Staff Sergeant Marcus Chen with the U.S. Army. Our vehicle broke down on the road, and we were hoping we might use your phone to call for assistance." The woman's gaze moved from Marcus to Jake, then to David, Sarah, and Tommy. Her expression was unreadable. Marcus found himself holding his breath, aware of how this must look, aware of history, aware of every reason this woman might have to be afraid, to be suspicious, to tell them to go to hell and never come back. "Storm took out the phone lines 3 hours ago," she said, her voice low and measured. "Cell towers too, I'd wager." Yes, ma'am, Marcus said. We noticed that. Another long moment of silence, broken only by the sound of rain hammering on the porch roof and distant thunder. Your vehicle, she said. Is it blocking the road? No, ma'am, it's pulled off to the side. Anyone hurt? No, ma'am. She studied them again, and Marcus saw something shift in her expression, something he couldn't quite identify. Then she closed the door. He heard the chain rattling, and for a second he thought she was shutting them out for good. But the door opened again, this time all the way. The woman stood there in a simple house dress and cardigan sweater, backlit by the warm glow of oil lamps inside. Well, she said, can't have soldiers standing out in the rain, can we? Come on in, wipe your feet. Marcus felt something in his chest loosen, but only slightly. Behind him, he heard Jake let out a breath he'd been holding. They filed in one by one, dripping water all over the small entryway despite their best efforts. The house was tiny. Marcus could see most of it from where he stood. A living room with worn but clean furniture, a kitchen visible through an archway, a hallway that probably led to one or two bedrooms. Everything was neat as a pin, and the whole place smelled like cinnamon and old wood. I'm Estelle Morrison, the woman said, closing the door behind Tommy, who was last in line. And before you track water through my whole house, there are towels in that basket there. Dry off best you can. They did as they were told, standing awkwardly in the small space, trying not to bump into each other or knock over any of the carefully arranged photos on the walls. Morrison, Jake said suddenly. That's my last name, too. Estelle glanced at him, her expression neutral. It's a common name. Yes, ma'am. She moved past them into the kitchen, and Marcus noticed she walked with a slight limp, favoring her left leg. I've got coffee on the stove, she called back. Real coffee, not that instant nonsense. You all look half frozen. Sit down in there and I'll bring you some. Marcus exchanged glances with his team. Sarah raised her eyebrows, a silent question about whether they should actually stay. Marcus nodded. What choice did they have? The storm showed no signs of letting up, and they had no way to call for help. They moved into the living room, careful and uncertain. The furniture was old, but well-maintained, a couch with a handmade quilt thrown over it, 2 armchairs with doilies on the arms, a coffee table with a Bible and a few magazines neatly stacked. The walls were covered with photographs, dozens of them, maybe hundreds. Black and white photos in ornate frames, color photos in simple ones, spanning what looked like decades. Marcus found himself drawn to them. A young Estelle, he recognized her smile, standing next to a man in an army uniform. The uniform looked like it was from the 50s, maybe early 60s. Another photo showed Estelle holding a baby, beaming at the camera. More photos showed the baby growing up, a boy who became a teenager, then a young man. That's my son, Daniel, Estelle said, entering with a tray holding 5 steaming mugs. Her voice was steady, but there was something underneath it, something that made Marcus's chest tighten. He was about your age when that was taken. She set the tray down on the coffee table, and they each took a mug. The coffee was strong and hot, and Marcus felt it warming him from the inside out. Sarah asked softly. Estelle settled into one of the armchairs, moving slowly. Vietnam, 1968. He was a medic. They said he died saving 3 other soldiers. She paused, her hands folded in her lap. They gave me a folded flag and a medal, told me he was a hero. The room fell silent except for the sound of rain on the roof and the occasional crack of thunder. I'm sorry, Marcus said, and he meant it. He'd lost friends in Iraq, knew what those folded flags meant, what they cost. Estelle looked at him, and for the first time her expression softened slightly. How long have you been in? 12 years, ma'am, 3 deployments. She nodded slowly, then turned her attention to the others. And you all, they each answered in turn. Jake, 3 years, 1 deployment. David, 5 years, 2 deployments. Sarah, 2 years, no deployments yet. Tommy, fresh out of basic, this was his first assignment. Where are you headed? Estelle asked. Fort Polk, ma'am, Marcus said. We're supposed to meet up with our unit. We ship out in 4 days. 4 days, she repeated, and you've broken down in the middle of nowhere. She shook her head slowly. The army really hasn't changed much, has it? Despite himself, Marcus smiled. No, ma'am, some things never change. Estelle stood up steadier now, as if she'd made some kind of decision. Well, you can't go anywhere tonight in this storm, and from the sound of that rain, it's not letting up anytime soon. I've got a spare room with a couple of beds, and we can make pallets on the floor. Not fancy, but it's dry and warm. Ma'am, Marcus said carefully, we can't impose like that. We'll just wait out the worst of the storm and then what? Walk 20 miles to the nearest town in the middle of the night. In uniform, she looked at him over her glasses. Sergeant, I may be old, but I'm not stupid. You know as well as I do that's not safe. Not for you, not for anyone you might encounter. She was right, and they all knew it, but Marcus still felt uncomfortable. This woman didn't know them, had no reason to trust them, every reason to be suspicious or afraid. Yet here she was, offering them shelter. "Why are you helping us?" Jake asked suddenly. His voice was quiet but intense. "I mean, no offense, but why?" Estelle looked at him for a long moment. "You think I shouldn't. I think most people wouldn't. Most people aren't me." She moved toward the hallway. "Now, are you going to keep standing there dripping on my floor, or are you going to get those wet uniforms off before you all catch pneumonia? There are some clothes in the spare room, my son's clothes. They should fit some of you. The rest can wear spare blankets till your things dry." As she disappeared down the hallway, the 5 soldiers looked at each other. "This is surreal," Sarah whispered. "Is this actually happening?" "She's trusting us," Tommy said, his young face troubled. "Just trusting us. Why?" David stood up, setting his coffee mug down carefully. "Maybe she's just a good person. Maybe not everyone in Alabama is what you think they are." "That's not what I meant," Tommy started. "Wasn't it?" "Both of you enough," Marcus said, but his voice lacked force. He was too busy thinking about that photo on the wall, young Daniel Morrison in his uniform, smiling at the camera, having no idea he had less than a year to live. He thought about his own mother, who'd lost her husband to Desert Storm, who still kept his medals in a box under her bed. Maybe Estelle Morrison knew something they didn't. Maybe she'd learned something from loss that they were still trying to figure out. Or maybe, Marcus thought as he followed her down the narrow hallway, maybe she was just braver than any of them. The spare room was small but clean, with 2 twin beds covered in quilts and a dresser against one wall. Estelle pulled out clothes from the dresser, flannel shirts, jeans, sweaters, and laid them on one of the beds. "These should fit most of you," she said. "The bathroom is across the hall. There are more towels in the closet. I'll put your uniforms in the wash once you're changed." "Ma'am, you really don't have to," Marcus started. "I know I don't have to. I'm doing it anyway." Her voice was firm. "You can argue with me, Sergeant, but you'll lose. I've been winning arguments since before you were born." Despite everything, Marcus found himself smiling. "Yes, ma'am." She left them to change, and Marcus organized the sleeping arrangements. He and David would take the beds, being the biggest. Jake, Sarah, and Tommy would make pallets on the living room floor. It wasn't ideal, but it beat sleeping in a dead Humvee in a thunderstorm. They changed into the dry clothes, Marcus ending up in jeans and a flannel shirt that fit surprisingly well, and brought their uniforms out to Estelle, who was already sorting them into piles in her small laundry room off the kitchen. "Ma'am," Sarah said quietly, "thank you for all of this." "You didn't have to stop thanking me," Estelle said, not unkindly. "You're soldiers. You serve your country. The least I can do is provide a warm bed for one night." She paused, holding one of their uniform shirts up to the light. "Besides, Daniel would have wanted me to." She loaded the washer and set it running, then moved back into the kitchen. "Now I know the army probably feeds you terrible food, so I'm going to make you something decent. Sit down, all of you. Don't just stand there taking up space." They sat around her small kitchen table, barely big enough for 5 people, and watched as she moved around the kitchen with practiced efficiency. Despite her age and her limp, she worked with the confidence of someone who'd been cooking in this kitchen for decades. Soon the smell of frying bacon filled the air, followed by eggs and something else Marcus couldn't identify, but that made his mouth water. "How long have you lived here, ma'am?" Tommy asked, his natural politeness overcoming his shyness. 53 years, Estelle said without turning around. "Moved here with my husband in 1972. He got a job at the mill and this house came cheap. It was falling apart then, but we fixed it up, made it home." "Your husband," David said carefully, "he's passed 12 years ago, heart attack, quick, they said, didn't suffer." She cracked another egg into the pan. "I've been here alone since then." "Don't you have family?" Sarah asked. "I mean other than my dead son." Estelle's voice was matter-of-fact, not bitter. "I have a sister in Mobile. She calls every Sunday, tries to get me to move down there, says it's not safe for me out here by myself." She finally turned around, a slight smile on her face. "I tell her I've been taking care of myself just fine for 82 years, and I'm not about to stop now." 82. Marcus felt a wave of something, respect, maybe, or admiration. This woman was 82 years old, living alone in the middle of nowhere, and she'd opened her door to 5 complete strangers in the middle of a storm. She set plates in front of them: bacon, scrambled eggs, grits, and something that looked like a cross between a pancake and a biscuit. "What is this?" Jake asked, poking at it with his fork. "Hoe cakes," Estelle said. "My grandmother's recipe. You eat it with butter and syrup, or you can have it with the eggs. Either way, you eat it." "I don't tolerate waste." They ate. Marcus couldn't remember the last time he'd had a home-cooked meal that wasn't from his own kitchen, and certainly never one this good. The hoe cakes were crispy on the outside, soft on the inside, and when he tried them with syrup, they were almost as good as the best pancakes he'd ever had. Around the table, the others were having similar reactions. Even Jake, who'd been tense and suspicious since they arrived, seemed to relax slightly as he ate. "This is incredible," Sarah said. "Where did you learn to cook like this?" "My mother and my grandmother," Estelle said, sitting down with her own plate. "And their mothers before them. Cooking is how we shared stories in my family. Every recipe came with a tale." She took a bite of hoe cakes. My grandmother used to make these when I was a little girl. We were sharecroppers in Mississippi, didn't have much, but she could make something out of nothing. Cornmeal, water, a little salt, that's all hoe cakes are, but they filled your belly and made you feel loved." "Sharecroppers," David said quietly. "That must have been hard." Estelle looked at him, really looked at him, and Marcus saw something pass between them, an understanding maybe, or a recognition. "It was harder for my grandparents. They were born into slavery, freed when they were children. For them, sharecropping was freedom, even if it was just another kind of chain." She paused. "But they survived. They made sure their children survived. And here I am, 82 years old, feeding Army sergeants hoe cakes in the middle of a thunderstorm. I'd say they did all right." The kitchen fell silent except for the sound of forks on plates and the constant drumming of rain. "How did you end up in Alabama?" Tommy asked. "If you're from Mississippi." "Followed my husband. He was from here originally, went north for work, ended up in Mississippi, and that's where we met. After Daniel was born, we came back here. His family was here and—" She trailed off, her expression distant. "And I needed to be somewhere that felt like home after Daniel died. Mississippi was too full of memories. Here I could start fresh." "But you kept his things," Sarah observed, gesturing toward the spare room. "Of course I did. He was my son." Estelle's voice was firm. "Just because someone dies doesn't mean you throw away everything they touched. Those clothes, they're Daniel's. They're also mine because he was mine. And now they're keeping you warm, which I think he'd like." Marcus felt something tighten in his throat. He thought about his own father's uniform, still hanging in his mother's closet after 20 years. Thought about how she'd never gotten rid of it, never moved on in that particular way, even though she'd eventually remarried. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "when you opened that door tonight, weren't you scared? 5 strangers in uniform in the middle of the night." Estelle set down her fork and looked at him, really looked at him the way she had when she'd first opened the door. "Scared, yes, but probably not in the way you think." "What do you mean?" "I wasn't scared of you hurting me. I was scared of turning you away and something happening to you." She leaned back in her chair. "When you live as long as I have, Sergeant, you learn that there are different kinds of fear. There's the fear of strangers, of people who look different or talk different or come from different places. That's easy fear, lazy fear. It doesn't take any courage to give in to that." She paused, and in the silence, Marcus heard the storm raging outside, felt the warmth of the kitchen around them. "But there's another kind of fear," Estelle continued. "The fear of living with yourself after you've made a choice you can't take back. The fear of becoming someone you don't recognize in the mirror. That fear, that's the one that keeps me up at night." She looked at each of them in turn. "So yes, I was scared when you knocked on my door, but I was more scared of who I'd become if I told you to go away." The words hung in the air, heavy and meaningful. Jake cleared his throat. "Mrs. Morrison, earlier, when I said what I said about being lost in Alabama, I didn't mean—" "Yes, you did," Estelle said, but her voice wasn't harsh. "And you weren't entirely wrong to think it. This part of the country has a history, a hard history, a bloody history." She stood up, moving to the stove to get more coffee. "But history isn't destiny. We get to choose who we are every single day. Sometimes that choice is easy, sometimes it's hard. Tonight it was easy." "How?" Sarah asked. "How was it easy?" Estelle poured coffee into their cups, her movements slow and deliberate. "Because you're soldiers, because my son was a soldier. Because I know what it's like to wait for someone who never comes home." She set the pot back on the stove. "Because even though I'm an old black woman in rural Alabama and you're what you are, we're all just people trying to do the right thing. And sometimes the right thing is as simple as opening a door." If you've been moved by this story so far, I invite you to subscribe to this channel. Stories like these, stories about compassion, understanding, and the bridges we build across our differences, are what we share here every week. Your subscription helps us continue creating content that matters. They finished eating in a comfortable silence that Marcus wouldn't have thought possible an hour ago. Estelle washed the dishes, refusing all offers of help, and sent them into the living room to dry off completely. The storm continued outside, but inside, the house felt like a sanctuary. Marcus found himself back in front of the photos on the wall. There were so many of them, a whole life captured in frames. Estelle as a young woman, bright-eyed and smiling, her wedding day. Daniel as a baby, as a toddler, as a young boy. The family together, Estelle, her husband, and Daniel posing in front of a Christmas tree at a beach in what looked like a church. That was taken the day before he left for basic training, Estelle said, appearing beside Marcus. She pointed to a photo of Daniel in civilian clothes, standing next to a packed duffel bag. He was so excited, thought he was going to see the world do something important. He did, Marcus said. He saved 3 people. 3 people I'll never meet, 3 families who got to keep their sons, their husbands, their fathers. Estelle's voice was quiet but steady. For a long time, I was angry about that. Angry that my son died so someone else's could live. It felt unfair. How did you stop being angry? Who says I stopped? She smiled slightly. I just learned to live with it. Anger is like a heavy coat. You can't take it off completely, but you can decide when to wear it. She touched the frame gently. Daniel believed he was doing the right thing. He believed in service, in sacrifice. Who am I to cheapen that with my anger? Behind them, Tommy had fallen asleep on one of the pallets, curled up under a quilt. Sarah sat in an armchair, reading one of the magazines from the coffee table. Jake and David were talking quietly in the corner, their earlier tension seemingly forgotten. Your team, Estelle said, watching them. They're not friends, are they? Marcus was startled by her perception. No, ma'am, we just got assigned together for this trip. Most of us have never worked together before. I can tell they move around each other like strangers, careful, uncertain. She settled into her armchair. Daniel wrote me letters from Vietnam. In the beginning, he wrote about how hard it was to trust the men in his unit. They were from all over different backgrounds, different beliefs. He wrote that he didn't think they could ever really work together. What changed? They got shot at. Estelle's voice was dry. Funny how that works. When someone's shooting at you, you stop caring about where someone's from or what color their skin is. You just care about whether they'll watch your back. Marcus lowered himself onto the couch. We haven't been shot at together yet. No, but you're stuck in my house together during a storm. Sometimes that's enough. She looked at him directly. Why did you join, Sergeant? My father was Army. He died when I was 8. I wanted. Marcus paused, surprised at his own honesty. I wanted to understand him, I guess, to understand what was worth dying for. Did you find your answer? I'm still looking. Estelle nodded slowly. Daniel never got the chance to find his. He was 21, still a boy in so many ways. She was quiet for a moment. Do you know what the last thing he wrote to me was? Marcus shook his head. He said, Mama, I'm learning that being a soldier isn't about the fighting. It's about taking care of the people next to you. It's about being someone they can count on when everything else falls apart. He wrote that 3 days before he died. She looked at Marcus. I think about that a lot. About what it means to take care of people, about what it means to be someone people can count on. Is that why you opened your door tonight? Part of it, she smiled slightly. The other part is that I'm a stubborn old woman who doesn't like being told what to be afraid of. Outside, the storm was finally starting to ease. The lightning was more distant now, the thunder a low rumble instead of a crash, but the rain continued, steady and relentless. How long do you think this will last? Marcus asked. Rain, probably through the night, but the worst is over. Estelle stood up slowly. I'm going to bed. You all should do the same. Morning will come early and you have a long way to go still. Ma'am, Marcus said, I want you to know what you've done for us tonight. It means more than you probably realize. Does it? She looked at him with those sharp eyes. Or are you just grateful to be dry and fed? The question caught him off guard. Both, I guess. That's honest. She moved toward the hallway, then paused. Sergeant, can I ask you something? Of course. When you knocked on my door tonight, what did you expect me to do? Marcus thought about it carefully. I expected you to be suspicious, maybe afraid. I thought you might not open the door at all, or if you did, you might call the police or tell us to leave. Why? Because that would be the smart thing to do, the safe thing. And yet here you are in my living room, wearing my dead son's clothes, full of my food. She smiled. Maybe the smart thing and the right thing aren't always the same thing. She went to bed, leaving Marcus alone with his thoughts and his sleeping soldiers. He sat there for a long time, listening to the rain, thinking about doors and choices and what it means to take care of people when everything else falls apart. Marcus woke to the smell of coffee and bacon. For a moment, he was disoriented, unsure where he was. Then he saw the photos on the wall, heard movement in the kitchen, and remembered. Estelle Morrison's house. The storm. 5 strangers welcomed in from the cold. He checked his watch, 6:30 in the morning. Around him, the others were starting to stir. Sarah was already awake, sitting up on her pallet and rubbing her eyes. Tommy was still out cold, snoring softly. Marcus made his way to the kitchen and found Estelle already dressed, moving around with the same efficient grace she'd shown the night before. Good morning, Sergeant, she said. Coffee's ready. Breakfast will be done in a few minutes. Ma'am, you really don't have to keep feeding us. I know, I'm doing it anyway. She cracked eggs into a pan. Besides, you can't deploy on an empty stomach. That's just asking for trouble. The others filtered in gradually, drawn by the smell of food and coffee. By 7 o'clock, they were all sitting around the kitchen table again, eating another enormous breakfast: eggs, bacon, grits, biscuits with gravy. "I've been thinking," Estelle said as they ate, "about your vehicle. There's a mechanic about 15 miles from here, Bill Johnson. He's good, honest, won't overcharge you. I called him this morning." "I thought the phone lines were down," Jake said. "They came back up around 5. I'm an early riser." She sipped her coffee. "Bill said he'd send his tow truck out around 9 to pick up your Humvee. He'll take a look at it, see what he can do." "Ma'am, we can't ask you to," Marcus started. "You didn't ask, I'm telling." Her voice was firm. "You helped defend this country. The least I can do is help you get where you're going. But the cost, I've already talked to Bill about that. He owes me a favor from way back. He'll do the work at cost, parts only, no labor charge." Marcus felt something in his chest, a mix of gratitude and confusion and something else he couldn't quite name. "Why are you doing all this?" Estelle set down her coffee cup and looked at him. "Because Daniel can't. Because when he died in some jungle on the other side of the world, some family over there lost their son trying to save him. Because kindness isn't something you save up for special occasions. It's something you practice every day with everyone you meet." She paused. "And because if Daniel had broken down somewhere, I'd like to think someone would have helped him. Someone would have fed him, given him a place to sleep, made sure he got where he needed to go." The kitchen fell silent. "But he didn't," David said quietly. "Get where he needed to go, I mean he died." "Yes," Estelle said simply. "He did, but that doesn't mean I stop hoping for the world to be better than it was. That doesn't mean I stop trying to be the person he thought I was." She stood up, collecting their plates. "Now you have a couple hours before Bill gets here. Your uniforms are clean and dry, folded on the couch. I suggest you use this time to rest, check your gear, do whatever soldiers do when they're waiting." They helped her clean up, she allowed it this time, and then did as she suggested. Marcus checked in with his team, made sure everyone was ready for the next leg of their journey. Their uniforms were indeed clean and neatly folded, and he found himself marveling again at this woman who had taken them in, fed them, cared for them, asked for nothing in return. Around 8:30, Estelle called them back to the living room. She was standing by the photos on the wall, and when they gathered, she began to speak. "I want to show you something," she said. She pointed to a photo of young Daniel. "This is my son at 18, fresh out of high school. He was planning to go to college, become a teacher, but then his draft number came up and everything changed." She moved to another photo. "This is him at basic training. He wrote me letters every week. Told me about the other men in his unit, boys from all over the country. Puerto Rico, California, Texas, New York. He said it was like the whole country crammed into one barracks." Another photo. "This was taken 6 months before he died. He'd made friends with some of the local kids near his base. They'd follow the soldiers around, practice their English. Daniel said they reminded him of the kids in his neighborhood back home, just trying to live their lives in the middle of something terrible." She turned to face them. "Daniel wasn't a hero because he died. He was a hero because of how he lived, because he saw people really saw them even when it would have been easier not to, because he chose kindness over fear, understanding over judgment." "Ma'am," Sarah said softly, "why are you telling us this?" "Because you're about to go to war," Estelle said simply. "And war has a way of making everything seem black and white, simple, enemy and friend, us and them, but it's not that simple. It never is." She looked at each of them. "When Daniel died saving those 3 soldiers, he didn't ask them what color they were, where they came from, what they believed. He just saw people who needed help. That's what made him a hero." She moved back to her chair and sat down slowly. "Last night when you knocked on my door, I had a choice. I could see 5 strangers, potential threats, or I could see 5 of Daniel's brothers and sisters far from home needing help." She smiled slightly. "I chose to see what Daniel would have seen." Jake stood up, his young face troubled. "Mrs. Morrison, I need to tell you something." His voice was shaky. "Last night when we first got here, I was scared, not just of the storm or being lost. I was scared of you, of knocking on a door in the middle of Alabama, not knowing who would answer or what they'd do." "I know," Estelle said. "How?" "Because I saw it in your eyes, the same way you saw fear in mine." She leaned forward. "The question isn't whether we're afraid. The question is what we do with that fear." "But I had no right to be afraid of you," Jake said. "You're just an old woman living in her house. You never did anything to me." "You had every right to your feelings," Estelle corrected gently. "Fear isn't logical. It's not about rights. It's about experience, about history, about the stories we tell ourselves." She paused. "The trick is learning not to let fear make your decisions for you." David spoke up from the corner where he'd been standing quietly. "Ma'am, I need to say something too. I grew up about 50 miles from here. My daddy worked at the same mill your husband did. I know this area, know its history, no." He trailed off. "Know what?" Estelle asked. Know that it hasn't always been kind to people like you. Know that there are reasons you might not trust people who look like me. He met her eyes. Know that nothing I say can change that history. No, Estelle agreed. Nothing can change history, but we can change what we do with it. She gestured to the photos on the wall. This room is full of history, pain and loss and struggle, but it's also full of love and hope and resilience. History is complicated, corporal. It's all of these things at once. Tommy, who'd been silent throughout, finally spoke up. I don't understand how you do it, how you're not angry. After everything you've been through, everything you've lost, how are you not just furious at all of it? Estelle looked at the youngest member of their group, and her expression softened. Oh, honey, I'm angry. I'm angry every single day. Angry that my son died in a war that shouldn't have happened. Angry that my husband worked himself to death at that mill for wages that barely kept us fed. Angry at every injustice I've seen in 82 years of living in this country. She stood up, walked to the window, looked out at the clearing sky. But here's what I've learned. Anger is easy. Anger is comfortable. Anger lets you feel righteous without having to do anything. The hard thing, the truly difficult thing, is to be angry and still choose kindness. To acknowledge all the pain and injustice and still open your door to strangers in a storm. She turned back to them. Daniel understood that. Even in Vietnam, even in the middle of that nightmare, he chose to see the humanity in people. He chose to help rather than hate. And when he died doing exactly that, helping. Her voice caught slightly. I won't dishonor his memory by becoming someone who closes doors. I won't let fear turn me into someone he wouldn't recognize. The room was absolutely silent except for the sound of a car engine approaching outside. That'll be Bill with his tow truck, Estelle said, her voice back to its normal, steady tone. Let me go talk to him. After she left, the 5 soldiers looked at each other. I feel like an ass, Jake said bluntly. Everything I assumed about this place, about her. We all made assumptions, Marcus said. That's the point, I think. We all walked in here with our own fears and biases and stories, and she met all of that with. He gestured around the room. With kindness, with grace. With her son's clothes and her grandmother's hoe cakes, Sarah added quietly. With everything she had. They heard voices outside, Estelle talking to someone, presumably Bill the mechanic. Through the window, Marcus could see a tow truck, an older man in coveralls talking animatedly with Estelle. What do we do now? Tommy asked. I mean, how do we thank her for this? I don't know if we can, David said. I don't know if there are words for what she did. Estelle came back inside, followed by Bill, a grizzled white man in his 60s with grease under his fingernails and laugh lines around his eyes. Bill says it's the alternator, Estelle announced. He can have it fixed by this afternoon. You'll be on your way to Fort Polk by evening. How much? Marcus asked Bill. Bill scratched his head. Well, parts run about 200, but Estelle here says you're deploying soon, so let's call it an even 100 military discount. That's too generous, Marcus started. Son, Bill interrupted. I was in the Navy for 8 years. I know what it's like trying to get where you need to be on Army timing and Army vehicles. Consider it my contribution to national defense. He grinned. Besides, Estelle makes the best peach cobbler in 3 counties. She's promised me one for helping you out, so really I'm getting the better end of this deal. They settled up, pooling their cash to pay Bill, and then helped him load the Humvee onto his truck. As they worked, Marcus found himself watching Estelle, who stood on her porch observing everything with that same calm, assessing gaze. As we reach this pivotal moment in our story, I want to pause and ask you something. This channel exists to share stories that challenge us, that make us think about who we are and who we want to be. If these stories matter to you, if they've made you think or feel or see the world differently, please consider subscribing. And if you've been moved by Estelle's story, leave a comment below. Share your thoughts. Tell us about a time someone showed you unexpected kindness. These conversations, this community, that's what makes these stories meaningful. By noon, they were sitting around Estelle's kitchen table one more time, eating sandwiches she'd insisted on making for lunch. The conversation had shifted from small talk to something deeper, more honest. Can I ask you something, Mrs. Morrison? Sarah said. When you first opened that door last night, what did you really think, in that first moment? Estelle considered the question carefully. I thought, here are 5 people who need help. And then right after that, I thought, I'm scared. And then, but Daniel would help them. All of that in about 3 seconds. You weren't worried about, Jake gestured vaguely, about all the obvious concerns. Of course I was, I'm not stupid. Estelle took a bite of her sandwich. But I'm also not going to let fear make me into someone small, someone who sees threats everywhere instead of opportunities to do good. That's a risk, David said. Opening your door to strangers. Everything worth doing is a risk. Estelle looked at him. Getting up in the morning is a risk, loving someone is a risk, bringing a child into this world, that's the biggest risk of all. But we do it anyway because the alternative is to live in fear, and that's not living at all. What if we'd been dangerous? Tommy asked. What if we'd hurt you? Then you would have proven yourself to be less than what I believed you to be. That would have been on you, not on me. She set down her sandwich. I can't control what other people do. I can only control who I choose to be, and I choose to be someone who opens doors, who offers help, who sees the best in people until they prove me wrong. That's a kind of strength I don't think I have, Sarah said softly. You do, Estelle assured her. You just haven't needed to use it yet. She looked at all of them. You're about to go somewhere dangerous. Somewhere where you'll have to make split-second decisions about who to trust, who to help, who might be a threat. Those decisions will define who you become. How do we know we'll make the right choices? Marcus asked. You don't, nobody does. Estelle stood up, moving to the counter to get more tea. Daniel certainly didn't. He wrote me letters full of doubt, full of fear about whether he was doing the right thing. But he kept trying. He kept choosing to help rather than harm, to build rather than destroy. She poured tea into their glasses. The last letter I got from him, it arrived 2 days after the army officers came to my door with their flag and their condolences. In it, he wrote about a choice he'd had to make. His unit had been ambushed, and in the chaos, he'd seen one of the local villagers caught in the crossfire. He wrote that he had a choice: stay in cover and let the villager die, or risk himself to help. Her hand shook slightly as she set down the pitcher. He wrote, Mama, I don't know if I'm brave or just stupid, but I couldn't let them die. Not when I could help, not when I could do something. She sat back down. 3 days later, he made the same choice again, and that time it cost him his life. The kitchen was silent. Do you regret it? Jake asked quietly. That he made that choice? Estelle looked at him for a long moment. Every single day, I regret that the world is a place where people have to make choices like that. I regret that my son died at 21 instead of living to be an old man with grandchildren. I regret every moment I don't get to see him, talk to him, hug him. She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was stronger. But do I regret that he was the kind of person who would risk himself to help someone else? Do I regret that he died being exactly who I raised him to be? No, never. I'd rather have had 21 years with a son who was good and kind and brave than a lifetime with someone who valued his own safety over other people's lives. That's a hell of a thing to say, David said. It's the truth. Estelle met his eyes. And it's a choice every parent of a soldier has to make, whether to wish their child was someone who played it safe, or to be proud that they raised someone who stands up when others need help. Marcus thought about his own mother, about the conversations they'd had before his first deployment. She told him almost the same thing. I'm proud of who you are, but I'm terrified of losing you. Both of those things are true. Mrs. Morrison, he said, I promise you all of us will remember this. What you've done for us, what you've taught us, we'll carry it with us. Good, Estelle said simply. Then maybe something good came out of all this loss after all. Bill called around 3 o'clock. The Humvee was fixed and ready to go. They gathered their things, their clean uniforms, their gear, and prepared to leave. Marcus found himself reluctant to go, which was strange. He'd only known this woman for less than 24 hours, but it felt like much longer. They stood in the living room one last time, and Estelle handed each of them a paper bag. What's this? Tommy asked. Food for the road, sandwiches, some fruit, cookies I baked this morning while you all were still sleeping. She looked at them sternly. You will not deploy on junk food from gas stations if I have anything to say about it. Ma'am, Marcus started. No. Her voice was firm. No more thank yous, no more apologies for imposing. You've thanked me enough. Now you need to go get to your unit, do your jobs, and come home safe. That's the thanks I want. They filed out onto the porch, and Estelle followed them. The day was clear and bright, all traces of the storm washed away except for some puddles in the yard and water still dripping from the trees. It was hard to believe that just 12 hours ago they'd been standing here in the rain, uncertain and afraid. Bill was waiting in the driveway with the Humvee, which looked cleaner than it had in months. All set, he called out. Should run fine now. I gave her a once-over while I had her in the shop. Changed the oil, checked the fluids, rotated the tires. You're good to go. They loaded up their gear, and one by one the soldiers hugged Estelle, something that would have seemed impossible the night before. When it was Marcus's turn, he found himself struggling to find words. I don't know how to thank you, he finally said. Then don't try, she patted his cheek gently. Just remember that fear doesn't have to win. Remember that kindness is always a choice. Remember Daniel, she smiled. And remember that an old black woman in Alabama trusted you enough to let you into her home. When things get hard over there, when you're scared or angry or confused, remember that trust is possible. Understanding is possible. Connection is possible. I will, Marcus promised. We all will. She stepped back and they climbed into the Humvee. As Marcus started the engine, it purred perfectly. He looked back at the small house. Estelle stood on the porch, one hand raised in farewell, and for a moment he could see Daniel standing next to her. Not a ghost, but a presence. A reminder of what they were fighting for and, more importantly, who they were supposed to be. They drove away slowly, and Marcus watched in the rearview mirror as Estelle's house got smaller and smaller until finally it disappeared around a bend in the road. That was... Sarah started, then stopped. I don't even know what that was. That was a lesson, David said quietly, in what it means to be better than your fear. She trusted us, Tommy said, wonder in his voice. She had every reason not to, and she just trusted us. No, Jake corrected, and they all turned to look at him. She chose to trust us. That's different. That's harder. They drove in silence for a while, processing everything that had happened. Marcus found himself thinking about the photos on Estelle's wall, about Daniel in his uniform, about the choice to open a door in a storm. We need to do something, he said suddenly. For her, something more than just remembering. Like what? Sarah asked. I don't know yet, but something. Marcus gripped the steering wheel tighter. She gave us more than a place to sleep. She gave us, I don't know, a model, an example of who we should be. We could write her, Tommy suggested. Let her know we made it safely. We'll do that, Marcus agreed. But it needs to be more, it needs to matter. They spent the next hour brainstorming as they drove, and slowly an idea began to form. They would write to Estelle, yes, but they would also write to their families, their friends, their fellow soldiers, and tell them about what happened. About an 82-year-old woman who opened her door to strangers, who fed them and clothed them and taught them about courage and kindness. They would make sure people knew about Daniel Morrison, about his sacrifice and his mother's strength. They would make sure the story spread not as some feel-good news item, but as a real, meaningful lesson about what it means to choose trust over fear, kindness over suspicion, hope over despair. When we get back from deployment, Marcus said, we visit her, all of us. We bring our families if we have them. We show them that house, tell them the story. We make sure it's not forgotten. And if... Tommy started, then stopped. If what? If something happens to her, I mean she's 82, what if by the time we get back? Marcus hadn't wanted to think about it, but Tommy was right. Estelle was elderly, living alone. A lot could happen in the months they'd be gone. Then we visit her grave, David said firmly. We tell her son what she did. We make sure her name is remembered. No, Jake said, and there was steel in his voice. If something happens to her, we make damn sure the world knows what she did. We make sure her story and Daniel's story become part of the permanent record. We make sure no one forgets that in the middle of a storm, in the middle of nowhere, an old woman chose to see 5 soldiers as people who needed help, not threats to be afraid of. They all nodded, a silent pact forming between them. They made it to Fort Polk with 6 hours to spare before the unit was scheduled to deploy. In the rush of final preparations, medical checks, gear inspections, and briefings, Marcus almost lost track of everything else. Almost. But that night, lying in his bunk with the sounds of 200 soldiers settling in for their last night stateside, Marcus pulled out the piece of paper Estelle had tucked into his food bag. He hadn't noticed it until they'd stopped for gas, and when he'd found it, he'd had to pull over and collect himself. It was a letter, written in neat, old-fashioned handwriting. Dear Sergeant Chen and team, by the time you read this, you'll be on your way again. I hope the rest of your journey is smooth and that you make it to your unit safely. I wanted to write you this note because there are some things that are easier to say on paper than face-to-face, and because I'm an old woman who's not sure she'll get another chance to say them. Thank you for letting me help you. Thank you for trusting me enough to come into my house, to eat my food, to sleep under my roof. You gave me something I didn't know I needed, a chance to take care of soldiers again, the way I wish I could have taken care of Daniel. Each of you reminded me of him in different ways. Your dedication, your uncertainty, your fear, your bravery, all of it. Watching you last night, I saw Daniel and his friends, all those boys who went off to war not really knowing who they were or who they'd become. I want you to know that I prayed for you this morning. I'm not a particularly religious woman, lost some of my faith when Daniel died, but I prayed anyway. I prayed that you'd be safe, that you'd come home, that you'd get the chance Daniel never did to grow old and wise and tired. But more than that, I prayed that you'd carry forward what we talked about, that you'd remember that fear doesn't have to win, that kindness is always a choice, that seeing the humanity in others is what separates us from the darkness. Daniel died saving people he didn't know, people who were strangers to him. He died believing that every life matters, that every person deserves help when they need it. I raised him to believe that, and even though it cost me my son, I've never regretted teaching him those values. Now I'm asking you to carry those values forward. When you're overseas, when you're scared and angry and everything seems black and white, Remember that there's always gray. Remember that every person you encounter is someone's child, someone's parent, someone's friend. Remember that the choices you make will define not just who you are, but who we are as a country. Be safe, be smart, be kind when you can, be fierce when you must. But most of all, be the kind of soldiers that Daniel would have been proud to serve with. Come home safe. And if you can, come visit an old woman and tell her your stories. I'll make you hoe cakes. With love and hope, Estelle Morrison, P.S. I put my address at the bottom. Write to me if you can. I get lonely sometimes, and letters from soldiers always made me feel connected to Daniel. Maybe they'll do the same with you. Marcus read the letter 3 times, then carefully folded it and put it in his wallet where it would stay for the next 8 months. The deployment was hard, harder than Marcus's previous 3. They lost 2 soldiers in the first month, an IED that shredded their vehicle and took both lives before anyone could react. They saw combat, saw things that would stick with them forever, made choices that would wake them up at night for years to come. But Marcus carried Estelle's letter with him everywhere. Read it when things got dark, when he felt himself starting to hate, when fear threatened to turn into something uglier. And he noticed that his team, the 5 of them who'd spent that night in Estelle's house, they carried it too, in their own ways. Jake, who'd been so suspicious and afraid that night, became the one who reached out to local civilians, who learned phrases in Arabic, who treated every person they encountered as a human being first and a potential threat second. David, who'd carried his own complicated history with the South, became the team's conscience, the one who questioned orders when they seemed wrong, who pushed back when things started to slide toward casual cruelty. Sarah, quiet Sarah, became their medic, throwing herself into caring for the wounded American, allied, enemy civilian with equal dedication. Estelle's son was a medic, she'd say when anyone questioned her. I'm honoring his example. Tommy, the youngest, grew up fast but never lost his fundamental decency. He wrote to Estelle every week, long letters about what they were seeing, what they were learning, what they were becoming. And to everyone's surprise, she wrote back. Short notes at first, then longer letters, sharing stories about Daniel, about growing up in Mississippi, about what she was learning from an 82-year-old lifetime. And Marcus became the kind of leader he'd always wanted to be but hadn't quite known how. He made decisions based not just on strategy or safety, but on values. On the belief that how you treat people matters, that kindness and strength aren't opposites, that fear doesn't have to win. They lost soldiers. They made mistakes. They did things they weren't proud of and saw things they wished they could forget. War didn't become noble or clean just because they'd learned some lessons from an old woman in Alabama. But they never lost sight of what Estelle had taught them. They never let fear turn them into something less than human. They never stopped seeing the people behind the faces, the humanity in the enemy, the complexity in every situation. And when things got really dark, when Marcus held a dying soldier and felt rage threatening to consume him, when Jake was offered a chance for revenge and had to choose not to take it, when Sarah couldn't save someone and wanted to give up, when David faced down a superior officer who wanted to do something unconscionable, when Tommy had to make an impossible choice in a split second, they all remembered the same thing. An 82-year-old black woman opening her door in a storm. Choosing trust over fear, choosing kindness over safety, choosing to be better than her circumstances would have excused her from being. If she could do that, they figured they could do this. 8 months later, they came home. Not all at once, deployments never end cleanly, but gradually in 1s and 2s. Marcus was the last to return, his tour extended by 6 weeks due to a mission that required his expertise. The day he finally touched down at Fort Polk, the first thing he did was check his phone. There were dozens of messages, mostly from family and friends, but one caught his eye, a text from Sarah. We're all here, all 5 of us. We need to go see her. This weekend. Don't make other plans. Marcus smiled. Of course they did. He'd been thinking the same thing for months. That Saturday, they piled into a rental car, a much nicer vehicle than the Humvee that had broken down almost a year ago, and drove to Alabama. They'd called ahead this time, and Estelle had sounded delighted to hear from them, though her voice had seemed frailer on the phone than Marcus remembered. As they turned onto her road, Marcus felt his heart start to pound. What if she'd changed? What if the memory he'd carried for 8 months didn't match reality? What if the house came into view and it was exactly the same? Same white siding, same neat porch, same flower wreath on the door. And standing on the porch, leaning slightly on a cane but smiling broadly, was Estelle Morrison. They practically tumbled out of the car, and within seconds she was surrounded by all 5 of them, hugging and being hugged, laughing and crying all at once. Look at you, she said, her voice thick with emotion. All of you home safe. "Oh, thank God you're home safe." "We promised we'd come back," Marcus said. "Soldiers promise a lot of things, doesn't mean they always can keep them." She wiped her eyes. "But here you are, here you all are." They went inside. It was like stepping back in time. Everything was exactly as Marcus remembered. The photos on the wall, the neat furniture, the smell of cinnamon and old wood. "I made hoe cakes," Estelle announced. "And coffee, real coffee. Sit down, all of you, and tell me everything." They sat around her kitchen table again, and this time the conversation flowed easily. They told her about the deployment, the good parts, the hard parts, the parts they were still trying to process. She listened to everything, nodding, asking questions, never flinching from the difficult stories. "You all came back different," she observed after a while. "I can see it in your eyes." "Is that bad?" Tommy asked. "No, honey, it's just true. War changes people. The question is whether it changes you into something better or something worse." She looked at each of them. "I think you all did well." "Because of you," Sarah said. "Because of what you taught us." "I didn't teach you anything you didn't already know," Estelle corrected. "I just reminded you." They talked for hours until the sun started to set and the kitchen was filled with golden light. Finally, Marcus stood up. "Mrs. Morrison, we have something for you." He pulled out an envelope from his jacket. "All 5 of us have been talking, planning. We want to do something to honor you and to honor Daniel." Estelle looked at the envelope suspiciously. "If this is money, it's not money, not exactly." Marcus opened the envelope and pulled out several papers. "We've been working with the Army, with our commanding officers, with some people in Washington. It took months, but we finally got approval." He handed her the first paper. "This is a commendation and official recognition from the Department of Defense for the assistance you provided to 5 service members in need. It comes with a certificate and a letter of thanks from the Secretary of Defense." Estelle's hands shook as she held the paper. I didn't do anything that deserves." "Let me finish," Marcus said gently. He handed her the second paper. "This is a scholarship in Daniel's name. We've raised funds from our units, from our families, from everyone we told about what you did, to create an annual scholarship for the child of a veteran who wants to study medicine or social work. It's not huge, but it's enough to make a difference." Tears were running down Estelle's face now, but she didn't make a sound. Jake stepped forward with the third paper. "And this is the important one. We've petitioned to have Daniel's name added to a memorial. Not just any memorial, but one specifically for medics who died saving others. His name will be there permanently for anyone to see. And next to his name, there will be a small plaque explaining what he did and how his mother carried forward his legacy of service and kindness. We wanted you to know," David added, "that your story, yours and Daniel's, it's not going to be forgotten. We're making sure of that." Sarah pulled out one more item, a leather-bound book. "And this is for you. We all wrote in it, every soldier in our company. They all know the story now about what you did for us. This book contains their letters, their thanks, their promises to carry forward what you taught us." Estelle held the book like it was the most precious thing in the world. She opened it slowly, reading the first few pages, and her tears fell onto the paper. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. This is too much." "It's not enough," Tommy said. "It could never be enough, but it's what we can do." Estelle closed the book carefully and looked at all of them. "You know what Daniel's last words were?" The soldiers who were with him told me later. They said he looked at them and said, "Worth it." Just those 2 words. "Worth it." She stood up slowly, and they all stood with her. "I didn't understand what he meant for a long time. I thought he meant that saving those 3 soldiers was worth dying for, but I think he meant more than that. I think he meant that the whole thing, his life, his service, his choice to help people even when it cost him all of it, was worth it." She looked at each of them. "You 5 coming here tonight, showing me that the choice I made to open my door meant something, that Daniel's death meant something, that love and kindness and trust can survive even war. You've shown me that he was right. It is worth it, all of it." They stayed until late, talking and laughing and crying together. They looked at photos of Daniel, and Estelle told them stories they hadn't heard before. They shared their own stories, darker ones now, stories about the deployment, about the choices they'd had to make, about the people they'd become. And through it all, Estelle listened with the same steady presence she'd had that first night. Never judging, never flinching, just accepting them, all of them, dark parts and light, the way she'd accepted them when they'd knocked on her door in a storm. As they were finally preparing to leave, it was past midnight now. Estelle pulled Marcus aside. "Can I tell you something?" She asked quietly. "Of course. After Daniel died, after my husband passed, I thought about selling this house, moving to the city with my sister, somewhere I wouldn't be alone so much." She looked around the small kitchen. "But I stayed. You know why?" Marcus shook his head. "Because I had this feeling, this belief, maybe, that there was something I was supposed to do here, some reason I was supposed to stay in this little house in the middle of nowhere." She smiled. I thought I was crazy. Thought I was just a lonely old woman making up purposes to avoid change. You weren't crazy, Marcus said. No, I was right, she patted his hand. You were what I was waiting for, a chance to be Daniel's mother again, to take care of soldiers again, to do for others what I wished someone could have done for my boy. She paused. You gave me that, you gave me purpose, you gave me peace. We gave you peace. Marcus felt his throat tight. Ma'am, you saved us, not just from the storm. From becoming people we didn't want to be. Maybe we saved each other, Estelle said simply. Maybe that's what happens when we choose kindness over fear. They left shortly after, but not before another round of hugs and promises to stay in touch, to visit again, to keep the connection alive. As they drove away, Marcus looked back one more time and saw Estelle on her porch waving goodbye, the porch light illuminating her in a soft glow. She's remarkable, Sarah said from the back seat. I mean, truly remarkable. Yeah, Marcus agreed, she is. What do we do now? Tommy asked. I mean, we honored her, we told her story, we created the scholarship. What else is there? We live it, Jake said firmly. We take what she taught us and we live it every single day. We open doors when other people would lock them. We choose trust when it would be easier to choose fear. We see the humanity in people even when it's hard. That's a tall order, David observed. So was going to war, Jake countered. We did that. We can do this too. They did. Over the years that followed, the five of them stayed in touch, not just with each other, but with Estelle. They visited when they could, wrote when they couldn't, made sure she was never alone, never forgotten. They told her story to everyone who would listen, in lectures at military academies, in conversations with fellow soldiers, in interviews with journalists who wanted to know how their unit had maintained its humanity through a difficult deployment. The story spread, slowly at first, then faster, the story of an old woman in Alabama who opened her door to strangers in a storm, and how that single act of kindness rippled outward, affecting dozens, then hundreds, then thousands of people. The scholarship in Daniel's name grew as more people contributed. Over the next decade, it would help 37 young people, children of veterans, pursue their dreams of helping others. The memorial with Daniel's name became a place of pilgrimage for medical personnel, a reminder of what they were striving to be. Estelle attended the dedication ceremony, frail but proud, and gave a speech that left not a dry eye in the audience. Marcus eventually retired from the Army and became a trainer for new officers, and he always started his leadership courses with the same story. 5 soldiers, a broken-down Humvee, a storm, and an old woman who chose to see helpers instead of threats. The question, he would tell his students, isn't whether you'll be afraid. You will be. The question is what you'll do with that fear. Jake went back to school and became a social worker, focusing on helping veterans readjust to civilian life. He started every session with the same question Estelle had asked him. Who do you choose to be? David returned to Alabama and ran for local office, determined to make his home state live up to its best ideals instead of its worst history. His campaign slogan was simple: open doors. People knew what it meant. Sarah stayed in the Army as a medic, rising through the ranks, teaching the next generation of medical personnel. She kept a photo of Daniel Morrison in her office, young, smiling, in uniform, and would tell anyone who asked that she was trying to be worthy of his example. Tommy, still the youngest, still the most idealistic, became a teacher. He taught high school history, and every year on the anniversary of that storm in Alabama, he would tell his students about Estelle Morrison. History, he would say, isn't just about the big events, the wars and elections and treaties. It's about the choices people make every day. It's about doors that open instead of staying closed. They all attended Estelle's 90th birthday party, bringing their families, their children, their own stories of how her example had shaped their lives. The party was held at her house. She'd refused to have it anywhere else, and over 100 people showed up. Soldiers she'd never met, people whose lives had been touched by her story, children who'd received the scholarship in Daniel's name. Estelle sat in her armchair, surrounded by photos, old and new, and looked around at the crowd with wonder. How did this happen? She asked Marcus quietly. How did one night turn into all of this? Because you chose kindness, Marcus said simply, and kindness multiplies, it ripples out, it changes things. I just opened a door. You opened more than that. You opened a possibility. You showed us that trust was possible, that connection was possible, that being better was possible. He looked around the crowded room. All these people, they're here because you taught us that doors can open instead of close, that strangers can become family, that fear doesn't have to win. Estelle was quiet for a moment, her aged eyes taking in the scene. Daniel would have liked this, she said finally. He would have liked knowing that his death meant something, that his life meant something, that people remembered. They'll never forget, Marcus promised. We'll make sure of that. Estelle Morrison died peacefully in her sleep 3 years later at the age of 93. She died in her own bed, in the house she'd lived in for over 50 years, surrounded by photos and memories and love. The funeral was held at the small Baptist church in town, and it was standing room only. The 5 soldiers, middle-aged now, with their own gray hairs and their own stories, sat in the front row with Estelle's family. They gave the eulogy together, taking turns, telling the story of a night in a storm and how it changed 5 lives, then dozens, then hundreds. Estelle Morrison taught us that heroism isn't always loud, Marcus said from the pulpit. Sometimes it's as quiet as opening a door. Sometimes it's as simple as making coffee for strangers. Sometimes it's as profound as choosing to trust when fear would be easier. She taught us that our choices matter, Jake added. That every day we decide who we want to be. And she showed us through her own example what it looks like to choose love over fear, kindness over suspicion, hope over despair. She honored her son's memory, Sarah said, her voice breaking slightly, by living the values he died protecting, by being the kind of person he would have been proud to call his mother. She changed us, David said firmly. And through us, she changed everyone we touched. That's legacy. That's immortality. Not in monuments or medals, but in the lives we influence, the choices we inspire, the doors we open. She would probably tell us to stop making such a fuss, Tommy finished, bringing some laughter through the tears. She'd say she was just a woman who made hoe cakes and opened her door in a storm, but we know better. We know what she gave us, and we promise all of us to carry it forward, to be worthy of her example, to open doors when others would lock them, to choose kindness when fear would be easier. They buried her next to her husband and her son, under a simple headstone that read, Estelle Morrison * 1933-2026. She opened doors, but her true memorial wasn't the headstone. It was the Daniel Morrison Medical Scholarship, which continued to grow and help more students every year. It was the dozens of soldiers who told her story to new recruits, keeping her memory alive in the very institution she'd served through her son's sacrifice and her own kindness. It was the children and grandchildren of those original 5 soldiers who grew up hearing about Grandma Estelle and what she taught their parents about being human in an inhuman world. It was Marcus, teaching another generation of officers about leadership that leads with love instead of fear. It was Jake, helping another veteran find their way home, not just geographically but spiritually. It was David, fighting for his community, refusing to accept that progress is impossible or that people can't change. It was Sarah, tending to another wounded soldier, seeing them not as a case or a casualty, but as someone's child, someone's Daniel. It was Tommy, telling another classroom full of teenagers about a woman who chose kindness in the middle of a storm, and challenging them to do the same in their own lives. Years later, Marcus would return to that stretch of road in Alabama with his daughter, who was studying history in college and wanted to understand the story he'd told her so many times. It doesn't look like much, she observed as they drove past the house, now owned by Estelle's niece, who'd kept everything exactly as it was. It never did, Marcus agreed. That's part of the point. Heroism doesn't always look heroic. Sometimes it looks like a small house on a back road, a porch light in a storm, an old woman opening her door. They pulled over and Marcus walked his daughter up to the porch. The niece had agreed to let them visit, and she welcomed them in with the same grace Estelle had shown all those years ago. The photos were still on the wall, Daniel in his uniform, Estelle and her husband. And now new photos, the 5 soldiers at various ages, their visits over the years, birthday parties and celebrations and quiet dinners around that kitchen table. She loved you all, the niece said, noticing Marcus looking at the photos. She talked about you all the time, about that night, about what it meant to her, about how you gave her back her purpose. She gave us ours, Marcus said quietly. We were 5 strangers thrown together by chance with nothing in common except our uniforms. We didn't trust each other, didn't really like each other. We probably would have finished that deployment and gone our separate ways, maybe sending Christmas cards for a few years until we forgot about each other. He looked at his daughter. But that night changed everything, because Estelle Morrison showed us what it looked like to be brave in the way that really matters. Not brave like charging into battle or facing down an enemy. Brave like opening your door to people you have every reason to fear. Brave like choosing trust over suspicion, kindness over caution, love over hate. His daughter wiped her eyes. I wish I could have met her. You have, Marcus said. Every time I've told you to see the person behind the face, to question your assumptions, to choose kindness, that was Estelle. Every time you've done the hard thing, the right thing, instead of the easy thing, that was her example living through you. They stayed for a while longer, and before they left, Marcus did something he'd done on every visit since Estelle's death. He stood in front of Daniel's Vowed, that young man frozen in time, forever 21, forever smiling, and made a report. "Sir," he said quietly, as if Daniel could hear him, "your mother lived to 93. She died peacefully, surrounded by love, knowing that her life mattered. The scholarship in your name has helped 42 students so far. Your memorial is visited by hundreds of medical personnel every year. Your story and hers is taught at 3 military academies and has been featured in 2 books and a documentary." He paused. "But more than that, she changed us. 5 soldiers who became brothers because your mother showed us how to be human in an inhuman world. We've tried to honor you both by living the values she taught us, by being the kind of soldiers you would have been proud to serve with." He saluted, something he'd never done for a private, but this felt right, and headed for the door. As they drove away, his daughter asked, "Do you think she knew how much she mattered?" "I hope so," Marcus said. "We tried to tell her, tried to show her, but I don't know if anyone can really understand the full impact they have on the world." "What do you want me to remember about all this?" his daughter asked. "What's the lesson you want me to take away?" Marcus thought about it for a long moment. "I want you to remember that who you are is a choice you make every single day. I want you to remember that fear is always easier than trust, but trust is always braver. I want you to remember that the most important moments in your life might not look important at the time, might just look like a decision about whether to open a door or keep it closed." He glanced at his daughter. "And I want you to remember that somewhere in Alabama, an 82-year-old black woman took a risk on 5 soldiers she had every reason to turn away. And that single act of courage, of kindness, rippled outward through time and space and touched thousands of lives, including yours. Because I wouldn't exist if you hadn't survived that deployment," his daughter said quietly. "Because you wouldn't exist," Marcus agreed. "And neither would your brother. Neither would Jake's 3 kids, or David's twins, or Sarah's daughter, or Tommy's son. None of you would be here if your parents hadn't learned from Estelle Morrison what it means to choose life over death, hope over fear, love over hate." They drove in silence for a while, and Marcus found himself thinking about all the times over the past 30 years when he'd had to make a choice about whether to see a threat or a person in need, whether to close off or open up, whether to let fear win or choose something better. Every time he'd thought about Estelle, every time he'd remembered that night in the storm, every time he'd asked himself what she would do, and every time it had made him better, made him more than he would have been without her example. "Dad," his daughter said as they reached the highway, "I want to tell her story in my thesis. Is that okay?" Marcus felt his chest tight. "More than okay. I think she'd like that. I think Daniel would too. Will you help me? Will you put me in touch with the others?" "With people who knew her?" "Of course," Marcus smiled. "Estelle Morrison's story deserves to be told again and again until everyone knows that in the darkest storms, sometimes a light shines, and sometimes that light is something as simple and as profound as an open door. Now, as we come to the end of this story, I want to ask you to do something. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Someone who's afraid, someone who's building walls, someone who's forgotten that trust is possible. Leave a comment below telling us about a time you opened a door, literally or figuratively, or about a time someone opened one for you. These stories matter. These connections matter. We're all just people trying to find our way through the storm, and sometimes the light that guides us home comes from the most unexpected places. And if this story has moved you, if it's made you think about the doors in your own life, the ones you keep closed and the ones you might open, then subscribe to this channel. Because every week we share stories like this. Stories about ordinary people making extraordinary choices. Stories about kindness and courage and what it means to be human in a complicated world. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. And thank you for being the kind of person who believes that stories like Estelle's matter. The legacy of that night in the storm continued to unfold in ways no one could have predicted. The 5 soldiers stayed close throughout their lives, bound by something deeper than friendship, a shared understanding of what it meant to be given grace when you expected judgment, kindness when you feared hostility, trust when suspicion would have been justified. They gathered every year on the anniversary of that night, sometimes at one of their homes, sometimes back in Alabama at Estelle's house. They brought their families, shared meals, told stories. They talked about the deployment, about the choices they'd made, about the people they'd become. And they always ended the same way, standing together, raising a glass, and saying the words that had become their motto, their prayer, their promise. Fear doesn't have to win. In the end, Estelle Morrison's story isn't just about one night in a storm, or about 5 soldiers who found shelter and so much more. It's about the choice we all face every single day, Who will we be when someone knocks on our door? Will we let fear guide our response, or will we choose something better, something braver, something more human? Estelle chose kindness. She chose trust. She chose to open her door when she could have kept it closed. And in doing so, she changed the world not in some grand, sweeping way, but in the way that actually matters, one person at a time, one choice at a time, one open door at a time. That's the lesson. That's the challenge. That's the gift she left behind. The question is, what will you do with it? What door will you open today?